Maria had found the truth, but it was worse than she had imagined. Maria crouched low, peering through the cracked window of the warehouse. Her heart pounded so hard she feared someone might hear it. The sight before her was horrifying. Cribs filled the dimly lit space, lined up in neat rows, each holding a crying or sleeping baby. Women shuffled around like ghosts, some cradling infants, others cleaning or preparing bottles of formula. The air inside the warehouse looked heavy and stale, and the women looked tired, their faces pale and lifeless. They wore thin hospital gowns, and some of them had visible bruises on their arms. Maria realized they weren't there by choice, they were prisoners. Near the back of the warehouse, Maria spotted Adrian.
Tamil, please tell us a story. Please like, comment, share and subscribe. Make sure to watch to the end.
Bluefield was a small town that seemed perfect on the outside. It had a population of just over 5,000 people, and everyone knew everyone. The streets were lined with neat houses, colorful gardens, and shiny faces. Children played freely in the parks, and shopkeepers greeted customers by name. Life in Bluefield moved at a calm, steady pace, and most people thought they were living in the safest place in the world. At the center of this peaceful town was St. Mary's General Hospital. It wasn't a large hospital, but it was essential for the community. It had a maternity ward, an emergency room, and a small staff who worked tirelessly to care for their neighbors. People trusted the hospital, and they especially trusted its most famous doctor, Adrian Mark. Dr. Adrian Mark had worked at St. Mary's for over 15 years. He was tall and well-dressed, with a calm voice that made people feel safe. He had delivered hundreds of babies, and the townsfolk adored him. They called him a hero, a man who brought new life into the world and gave comfort to those in need. Adrian was a regular at the town's events. He always showed up at fundraisers, church gatherings, and community meetings. He knew how to charm people with his friendly smile and kind words. To the people of Bluefield, Adrian was more than just a doctor, he was a symbol of hope and care. But Adrian Mark had a secret. Beneath his warm smile and polished appearance, he hid a dark, terrible truth. He wasn't the kind man everyone thought he was. For years, he had been using his position at the hospital to run a cruel, illegal business. He didn't see babies as precious lives. He saw them as products he could sell for money. Late at night, when the hospital was quiet, Adrian would lock himself in his office and make phone calls. He had connections in faraway cities, people who wanted to buy newborns for different reasons, some legal, some illegal. Adrian made a lot of money from these deals, and he kept his operation hidden so well that no one suspected a thing. The people of Bluefield continued to trust him. They brought their pregnant wives, daughters, and sisters to him, believing he would help them. But Adrian's heart had grown cold. He saw these families as opportunities to grow his business, not as people who needed his care. And so, the town of Bluefield remained peaceful, unaware of the evil that lurked within their trusted doctor. By day, Dr. Adrian Mark was the town's most trusted doctor. He walked the hospital halls with confidence, greeting nurses and patients with a warm smile. He was always ready to answer questions, hold worried hands, and make people feel safe. But when the sun went down and the hospital grew quiet, Adrian became someone else entirely. His real work began at night, after his last patient had gone home and the nurses were finishing their shifts. Adrian would head to his private office. The room was neat and professional on the surface, but hidden in the locked drawers of his desk were documents, phone numbers, and transaction records, evidence of his secret business. Adrian was running a baby selling operation. It had started small years ago, when a desperate couple had offered him money for a baby. They couldn't have children of their own and were willing to pay anything to adopt. Adrian had seen an opportunity. He had lied to another patient, telling her that her baby had been stillborn. Instead of returning the baby to the grieving mother, he handed it over to the couple and pocketed the money. From there, his scheme grew. Adrian realized there was a demand for babies, and he had the power to meet it. He set up connections in nearby cities and even in other countries. His network included adoption agents, brokers, and even wealthy individuals who didn't want to go through legal adoption processes. Adrian didn't just sell babies, he created them. In a hidden basement at the hospital, he ran what he called the factory. Women, often from poor or desperate backgrounds, were kept there under false promises. Some were told they would be given jobs. Others believed they were staying there for special medical care. In truth, they were being forced without its challenges. Some nights, he would sit alone in his office, staring at the piles of cash and wondering if he had gone too far. He didn't feel guilt, he had buried those emotions long ago, but he knew that one mistake could destroy everything he had built. Still, the money was too good to stop. Adrian had grown rich from his scheme. He owned properties in other cities, had expensive cars, and even a hidden bank account overseas. To him, the babies were just numbers in a business plan, and the mothers were tools to achieve his goals. Bluefield remained unaware of the monster in their midst. To the townsfolk, Adrian was still the kind, caring doctor who helped bring their children into the world. They didn't know that some of those children had been sold, that some of their neighbors' babies had been stolen. But Adrian couldn't hide forever. His web of lies was growing too large, and cracks were beginning to show. All it would take was one curious person to start pulling at the threads, and his entire operation would come crashing down. Maria Green was a young woman with a quiet strength about her. At 24, she had faced more challenges than most. She had grown up in a small farming village and worked hard to support herself after her parents passed away. When Maria found out she was pregnant, the father of her child disappeared, leaving her to face motherhood alone. Maria was scared but determined. She packed her few belongings and moved to Bluefield, a place she had heard was peaceful and welcoming. She rented a small apartment, found a job at a local diner, and began preparing for her baby's arrival. Maria didn't have much, but she promised herself she would give her child a good life. As her due date approached, Maria heard glowing recommendations about Dr. Adrian Mark. The townsfolk spoke of him as if he were a saint. Dr. Mark delivered all 3 of my kids, one diner regular told her. You couldn't be in better hands. Maria decided to trust the doctor. When she met him for the first time, she was comforted by his calm voice and reassuring smile. Don't worry, Maria, he told her during a prenatal checkup. You and your baby will be fine. I'll take care of everything. But behind the charm, Adrian had already decided Maria would be his next target. She had no family to fight for her and no one to question him if something went wrong. To Adrian, Maria's situation was perfect. The day Maria went into labor started like any other. She had been working at the diner when the contractions began. A co-worker called an ambulance, and Maria was rushed to Steady Mary's hospital. Adrian was there to greet her, his voice calm and steady as he led her to the maternity ward. Maria was in pain but excited to meet their baby. The nurses prepared her for delivery, and everything seemed to be going smoothly. But then Adrian made a decision that changed everything. Maria, we're going to give you some medicine to help you relax, he said, holding her hand. She nodded, trusting him completely. Within moments, Maria felt herself drifting into unconsciousness. When she woke up hours later, the room was quiet. The bright overhead lights had been dimmed, and Adrian was sitting beside her. His expression was grave. Maria, he began softly, I have some bad news. I'm so sorry, but your baby didn't survive. Maria stared at him in disbelief. No, that can't be true, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Adrian reached out and gently squeezed her hand. It was unexpected. The baby's heart just stopped. We did everything we could, but it wasn't enough. Maria broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. Adrian stayed by her side, offering words of comfort that he didn't mean. Inside, he felt no remorse. He had already made arrangements for Maria's baby to be picked up and sold to a couple in another city. For most women, the story would have ended there. But Maria was different. Even in her grief, something about Adrian's explanation didn't sit right with her. Can I see my baby? She asked through her tears. Adrian hesitated, but only for a moment. I'm sorry, Maria, The baby was in such a fragile state that we had to take care of things quickly. I didn't want to burden you with seeing her like that." Maria nodded, though her heart screamed that something was wrong. She told herself it was just her grief playing tricks on her, but the doubt lingered. After she was discharged from the hospital, Maria couldn't stop thinking about that night. Why had they given her anesthesia for a normal delivery? Why hadn't anyone shown her the baby? Why had Adrian seemed so calm while delivering such devastating news? Maria tried to shake the feeling, but the questions wouldn't leave her alone. One evening, she sat in her tiny apartment, staring at the ceiling. Finally, she made a decision. She needed answers. Maria couldn't let it go. No matter how much she tried to push the doubts aside, they kept coming back, stronger and louder. The words Adrian had spoken, his calm demeanor, the lack of a body to grieve, all of it haunted her. She had nothing left to lose, so she decided to find the truth, no matter where it led her. The first step was to return to Steady Mary's hospital. Maria told herself she was simply going to ask more questions, to get the closure she needed, but deep down, she knew she was looking for something more. When Maria walked into the hospital, her stomach churned. The maternity ward was quiet, with nurses bustling about and patients resting in their rooms. Everything looked normal on the surface, but Maria felt like she was walking into a storm. She stopped at the front desk and asked to see Dr. Mark. The receptionist gave her a sympathetic look. "I'm sorry, dear," she said. "Dr. Mark is in surgery right now. Is there something I can help you with?" Maria shook her head. "No, it's okay. I'll wait." As she sat in the waiting area, she noticed a nurse passing by, a woman in her 40s with a kind face and a tired expression. Maria had seen her during her labor but couldn't remember her name. On impulse, Maria stood up and approached her. "Excuse me," Maria said quietly. "Can I talk to you for a moment? It's about my baby." The nurse hesitated but nodded. "Of course. Let's step into the break room." The break room was small and cluttered, with a coffee machine humming in the corner. The nurse gestured for Maria to sit. "I'm Linda," she said. "I was working the night you delivered. What's on your mind?" Maria hesitated, unsure of how much to say. I just feel like something's wrong," she admitted. "Dr. Mark told me my baby died, but I never saw her. I don't know why, but I can't stop thinking about it." "Does that ever happen? Babies dying suddenly like that?" Linda's face softened with sympathy, but Maria noticed a flicker of something else, hesitation, maybe even fear. "Well," Linda began slowly, "it's not impossible, but it's rare, especially if the pregnancy was healthy. I remember your case. You seemed fine before." She trailed off, glancing at the door as if worried someone might overhear. Maria leaned forward. "Please, Linda, if there's anything you can tell me, anything at all I need to know." Linda looked conflicted. She lowered her voice. "Look, I've worked here for years, and most of the time things are normal, but there have been rumors, missing babies, records that don't add up. I've always told myself it was just mistakes, but..." She stopped, shaking her head. Maria's heart pounded. "But what?" she pressed. Linda hesitated, then sighed. "I can't say for sure, but I've seen things that don't make sense. Patients whose babies died under strange circumstances, files that disappear, and it always seems to happen when Dr. Mark is involved." Maria felt like the ground was shifting beneath her. She thanked Linda and left the hospital, her mind racing. That night, she sat at her small kitchen table, staring at the notebook where she had scribbled every detail she could remember about her time at the hospital. The next day, Maria returned to the hospital, pretending she needed to pick up her medical records. With Linda's quiet help, she gained access to the hospital's archive room. The room was dimly lit, filled with rows of filing cabinets and stacks of paperwork. Maria's hands shook as she began searching through the files. She found her own file quickly, but it was thinner than she expected. The section where her baby's records should have been was missing entirely. She searched further, pulling files from other patients who had delivered around the same time. It didn't take long for her to notice a pattern. Several files were incomplete, all of them connected to Adrian Mark. There were no death certificates for the supposed stillborn babies, and in some cases, the mother's records ended abruptly after delivery. Maria's suspicion turned into a chilling certainty. Something was terribly wrong at Steady Mary's, and Adrian was at the center of it. Maria knew she couldn't confront Adrian directly, not yet. She needed more proof. She decided to follow him, watching his movements and trying to find out what he was hiding. Late one evening, Maria parked her car near the hospital and waited. Around midnight, she saw Adrian leaving the building, his coat slung over one arm and a briefcase in his hand. He wasn't heading home. Instead, he drove out of town, toward the industrial district. Maria followed at a safe distance, her palms sweaty on the steering wheel. After about 20 minutes, Adrian pulled into the parking lot of an old, abandoned warehouse. Maria parked a few streets away and crept closer on foot. Peeking through a cracked window, Maria's breath caught in her throat. Inside the warehouse were rows of cribs, each holding a crying baby. Women in hospital gowns moved about, some tending to the babies, others looking dazed and exhausted. Maria had found the truth, but it was worse than she had imagined. Maria crouched low, peering through the cracked window of the warehouse. Her heart pounded so hard she feared someone might hear it. The sight before her was horrifying. Cribs filled the dimly lit space, lined up in neat rows, each holding a crying or sleeping baby. Women shuffled around like ghosts, some cradling infants, others cleaning or preparing bottles of formula. The air inside the warehouse looked heavy and stale, and the women looked tired, their faces pale and lifeless. They wore thin hospital gowns, and some of them had visible bruises on their arms. Maria realized they weren't there by choice, they were prisoners. Near the back of the warehouse, Maria spotted Adrian. He was speaking with a man in a dark suit, gesturing toward the cribs. She couldn't hear the conversation, but the body language was clear. Adrian pointed to one crib, then another, as if making a deal. The man nodded and handed Adrian a thick envelope. Adrian opened it, revealing a stack of cash, which he quickly tucked into his briefcase. Maria's stomach turned. There was no doubt now. Adrian was selling babies. Maria's first instinct was to run, to get as far away as possible and pretend she hadn't seen anything. But she couldn't. Her legs felt rooted to the ground, and her mind raced with thoughts of the babies inside, the mothers who might still be searching for them, and the women trapped in this nightmare. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone. She snapped as many pictures as she could, trying to capture every detail. The cribs, the women, and Adrian with the man in the suit. She even recorded a short video, her hands shaking as she zoomed in on Adrian's face. Maria knew she couldn't confront Adrian herself. She needed help, someone who could take him down. She slipped away quietly, making her way back to her car. The drive home was a blur, her mind spinning with fear and determination. The next morning, Maria met Linda at a small cafe on the edge of town. Linda looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder as if she expected Adrian to walk in at any moment. "You were right," Maria said, sliding her phone across the table. "Look at this." Linda's eyes widened as she scrolled through the pictures and video. "Oh my God," she whispered. "I knew something was wrong, but this is worse than I imagined. We have to go to the police," Maria said firmly. Linda hesitated. "Maria, Adrian has connections. He's powerful. If we go to the wrong person, he'll find out, and we'll both be in danger." Maria nodded. She had thought about that too. "We have to be careful, but we can't stay silent. I'm going to the police, and I'm going to find someone who will listen." Maria didn't waste any time. She went to the police station that same afternoon, asking to speak with a detective. She was introduced to Detective Caleb Royce, a tall, middle-aged man with a no-nonsense demeanor. Maria told him everything, showing him the pictures and video. At first, Caleb looked skeptical, but as he examined the evidence, his expression changed from doubt to grim determination. "This is serious," he said, leaning back in his chair. If what you're saying is true, this could be one of the biggest cases we've ever seen. Caleb assured Maria that he would handle the investigation carefully. He promised not to tip off Adrian until they had enough evidence to make an arrest. He also advised Maria to stay away from the warehouse and avoid any contact with Adrian. The police began their investigation quietly, gathering more evidence and interviewing former patients of Adrian's. They discovered a disturbing pattern. Multiple women reported similar stories of stillbirths, with no explanation or proof. Some of these women had tried to ask questions but were brushed off or intimidated into silence. Meanwhile, Adrian began to suspect that something was wrong. One of his buyers had called him, complaining about a delay in their shipment. Adrian brushed it off as a logistical issue, but his instincts told him to be cautious. He started noticing strange things, files that seemed to have been moved, a nurse who avoided his gaze, and whispers among the staff. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. One evening, as Adrian left the hospital, he saw a figure standing in the shadows near the parking lot. For a moment, he thought it was Maria, but when he stepped closer, the figure disappeared. Adrian's paranoia grew. After weeks of careful planning, the police were ready to act. They had gathered enough evidence to link Adrian to the warehouse and the baby selling operation. Detective Caleb led the raid, accompanied by a team of officers. Maria stayed at the station, her heart pounding as she waited for news. Hours later, Caleb returned, his face serious but triumphant. "We got him," he said. "And we found your baby." Maria's knees buckled and she sank into a chair. Tears streamed down her face as Caleb explained that DNA tests would be conducted to confirm the baby's identity, but he was confident it was Maria's daughter. Adrian was arrested at his home that same night. The once respected doctor looked disheveled and panicked as officers led him away in handcuffs. The town of Bluefield was shocked when the news broke. People couldn't believe that the man they had trusted for years was capable of such horrific crimes. For Adrian, the life he had carefully built was over. His web of lies had unraveled, and there was no escape. The news of Dr. Adrian Mark's arrest spread like wildfire. Bluefield was in shock. People gathered in small groups, whispering about the horrifying revelation. Some refused to believe it. "Not Dr. Mark," they said. "He's delivered half the children in this town." But others couldn't deny the evidence piling up. Maria, however, wasn't concerned about the gossip. Her only focus was the reunion she had been waiting for. The police had located her daughter, but the process wasn't immediate. DNA tests had to confirm the match. And until then, Maria couldn't see her baby. The waiting was agonizing. Detective Caleb Royce kept Maria updated. "You've done more than you realize," he told her during one of their meetings. "Your bravery didn't just save your baby, it's going to save many others." Maria nodded, but the weight of everything was overwhelming. She had uncovered something far darker than she ever imagined. And though Adrian was in custody, Maria needed to confront him one final time. Maria approached Caleb with a bold request. "I want to see him." Caleb hesitated. "Maria, I'm not sure that's a good idea. He's dangerous, manipulative. He might try to mess with your head." "I need answers," Maria said firmly. "I need to hear it from him. Why he did it. How he could look me in the eye and lie like that. I need closure." After much convincing, Caleb arranged for Maria to visit Adrian under strict supervision. The room was cold and sterile, with a metal table and two chairs bolted to the floor. Adrian sat in one chair, his wrists cuffed and his usually confident demeanor replaced with a haunted look. When Maria entered, their eyes met, and for the first time, she saw the man behind the mask. "Maria," he said, his voice soft and almost pleading. "You have to believe me. I never meant for things to go this far." Maria clenched her fists, her voice trembling with controlled rage. "You lied to me. You told me my baby was dead. Do you have any idea what that did to me? And it wasn't just me, was it? How many other mothers? How many children did you steal and sell like objects?" Adrian lowered his head, avoiding her gaze. I didn't have a choice, he muttered. I started small. Just one mistake, one lie. Then it grew. The money, the connections, they pulled me in. I couldn't stop even if I wanted to. Maria slammed her hand on the table. Don't you dare sit there and pretend you're the victim. You had a choice every single time. You chose greed over human lives. Adrian flinched, his fod crumbling. You don't understand, he said, his voice breaking. People trusted me. They believed in me. And when I started losing control, it was too late. If I stopped, they would have destroyed me. Maria's voice softened, but her words cut deep. You destroyed yourself, Adrian. You destroyed families. You destroyed mothers like me who trusted you to protect their babies. Adrian looked up, tears in his eyes. For a moment, Maria thought she saw regret. But then he leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening. I did what I had to do, he said coldly. You wouldn't understand. Maria stood, her body shaking with anger. You're right. I'll never understand how someone could be so cruel. She turned and walked out, leaving Adrian alone with his guilt or what little of it he felt. Adrian's trial was swift and public. Witness after witness came forward, recounting their experiences with him. Former patients, nurses, and even some of his buyers testified, painting a picture of a man who had manipulated everyone around him for personal gain. The evidence was overwhelming. Falsified medical records, financial transactions, and even the testimony of some of the women who had been held in the baby factory. Adrian's defense crumbled under the weight of the truth. The judge sentenced Adrian to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His medical license was permanently revoked, and his name became synonymous with betrayal and evil. For Maria, justice was bittersweet. She was reunited with her daughter, a beautiful baby girl with a tiny tuft of dark hair and bright, curious eyes. Holding her for the first time, Maria wept tears of relief and love. She named her daughter Hope, a symbol of the strength and courage that had carried them through the darkest of times. Though the road ahead was still uncertain, Maria felt a newfound determination. She decided to dedicate her life to helping other mothers and children, ensuring that no one would ever have to endure what she had. Bluefield began to heal, though the scars of Adrian's betrayal would never fully fade, and Maria, with her daughter in her arms, proved that even in the face of unimaginable evil, hope and justice could prevail. 5 years had passed since the shocking case of Dr. Adrian Mark was brought to light. Bluefield had slowly moved on, but the scars of his community. For many, the story served as a grim reminder of the dangers of blind trust. Yet, for others, it was a story of resilience, justice, and the power of truth. Maria Green had transformed her pain into purpose. She opened the Hope Center, a community organization dedicated to supporting mothers and children in need. The center offered free prenatal care, parenting classes, counseling, and legal assistance for families navigating complex situations. It also became a safe haven for women who had been victims of trafficking or exploitation. The walls of the Hope Center were decorated with pictures of smiling babies and their mothers, a testament to the lives Maria and her team had touched. And at the heart of it all was Maria's daughter Hope. Hope was now a spirited 5-year-old with a vibrant personality. She loved helping her mother at the center, often playing with the other children or handing out crayons for art activities. Her laughter echoed through the halls, a constant reminder of why Maria had fought so hard for justice. Maria had also become a vocal advocate for reform in the medical system. She worked closely with law enforcement and healthcare professionals to develop stricter oversight policies, ensuring no doctor could exploit their position. The way Adrian had, her story reached far beyond Bluefield. Maria was invited to speak at conferences, sharing her journey and calling for action to protect vulnerable mothers and children. She wrote a memoir titled Against All Odds, which became a bestseller and inspired many to stand up against corruption. Adrian Mark's name had become infamous. In prison, he was a shadow of the man he once was, his arrogance replaced by bitterness and regret. Occasionally, he would hear news of Maria's work and the thriving center she had built. Though he rarely admitted it, Adrian couldn't escape the guilt that gnawed at him. In the quiet of his cell, he would sometimes wonder what might have been if he had chosen differently, if he had valued life over greed. But it was too late for redemption. The town of Bluefield, once rocked by Adrian's crimes, had begun to rebuild its trust in the medical community. A new hospital administrator had been appointed, and policies were implemented to prevent future abuses of power. The community rallied around Maria, supporting her efforts and ensuring her message of hope reached as many people as possible. One warm spring afternoon, Maria and Hope stood in the garden behind the Hope Center. Flowers bloomed in vibrant colors and children played on the swings nearby. Hope tugged at her mother's hand. "Mommy," she said, her voice full of curiosity. "Why do you call me Hope?" Maria knelt down, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "Because you're the reason I never gave up," she said. "You're the reason I kept fighting. You gave me hope when everything felt impossible." Hope smiled, wrapping her small arms around her mother's neck. As Maria held her daughter close, she looked out at the bustling center, the mothers and children whose lives were better because of her fight. She knew the road had been hard, but she also knew it had been worth it.